Hey, Rainbow here. Welcome, and how are you? So I covered this when I first got the bike after the first couple of fill-ups, not Phillips, but fill-ups on the gas. And I'm going to cover it again because now I have over 300 gallons into this bike and almost 70 fill-ups. So we're going to talk about the gas mileage on this bike. Now, right now I have about 9,800 miles on this bike, and soon I'm going to be putting together a little bit more comprehensive. I'm going to take my time on this one, and I'm going to do a 10,000 mile review. Now this bike is 5 months old, and I'm just ready to hit the 10,000 mile mark. So I'm going to give a pretty comprehensive review for such a new bike. And well, anyway, let's get started and let's go look at the numbers as far as gas mileage is concerned. Okay, here we are looking at the Ducati Multistrada V4S mileage. All right, here we go. So I first filled up with 108 miles. I know we saw this once before, but now here's the difference. Right now, I have 9,778 miles on this bike. Actually, I did. I have more than that now because this was the last time that I filled up. Okay. Now, with that being said, I have filled up this bike a total of 69 times for a grand total of 300 plus gallons that I have put into this bike in just about 5 months and almost 10,000 miles. Now, I will let you know that there will be a review of this bike when I hit 10,000, which will be sometime this week, actually, as long as the weather cooperates. So anyway, let's break down these numbers. How I did it was every time I go get gas, I put in the odometer and a number of gallons. It calculates for me. I have a little formula there that it calculates for me. Well, I did have a formula in there. Anyway, it does the formula for me and then calculates my miles per gallon. And then I keep track of my total miles, my total gallons, and I put these two together in order to average the miles per gallon because that's going to give us the overall. You can actually cheat this system. Like if you wanted to do a bunch of trips where you refilled quickly and you kept putting in high numbers and then doing regular numbers so that you were always like being really easy on the throttle. So you can manipulate the numbers if you did it that way. So that's why I chose to use the total miles, total gallons to get my average mile per gallon. Now, after 9,700 plus miles and 300 gallons, I have averaged on the Ducati Multistrada V4S 32.56 gallons, little over 32 miles per gallon. That isn't great, but for a bike with this type of horsepower, this type of response, this height, I am not really going to complain because you get what you pay for and your gas mileage is based on your wrist and the power of the bike. Okay. I've had bikes where I easily got over 50, and but that's not the case here. So if you really take a good look at why you want this bike, if you solely want it for touring and for touring only, and you like driving or riding more than 2-3 hours before you fill up again, it's probably not the bike for you, to be quite honest with you. Yes, it has a 5.8 gallon tank, but we're going to talk a little bit more about that. All right, when I refill, the average amount of gallons that I put in is 4.35, which means typically on average I end up having about 1.5 gallons left in the tank. So this is a tough one because today something really interesting happened, and this never happened before. I let it get to 0, which I've let it get to 0 before and didn't have a problem, I only had about 5 more miles to go when the bike told me it had 0 miles left. Now, I know from my history that means I have anywhere between a gallon, typically just under, maybe around a gallon left, okay? Whenever I take it all the way down, sometimes maybe there's 3/4 of a gallon left, but rarely do I have only a half a gallon left, okay? So I hit 0. I was already riding for about a mile or 2, and then I knew I had 5 more to go. And then the bike on the highway, now I was in 6th gear doing around 80 something, 82, 84 miles an hour. And the bike just started, I thought I was going to run out of gas. It just started losing power, coming back up, losing power, coming back up. And I was like, oh crap. But when I slowed down, the fuel intake worked fine. And I no longer had that bucking when you feel like you're running out of gas. I had another 3 miles to go when that started happening, basically. And yeah, it was about 3-ish more so miles to go. And I slowed down to about 70, 71, got off the exit, even throttled to the next light and pushed the bike a little bit, and it was fine. But it just seems like on the highway, when I got it down that low, it didn't want to give me anything on the higher end, you know, when you start pushing it a little bit in the 80 mile an hour range. Okay. So I thought that was interesting. And when you look at what I actually put in, it was probably one of the lowest that I let the bike ever get. And that was basically almost 5.5 gallons. So I didn't have a whole lot left. There's been times I took it to 5.3. This is almost 5.5 gallons. See, I've taken it to where I've put 5 gallons in, you know, a couple of times, not very often. And, you know, there's this time I put in 1.7. I think I was on a trip with a bunch of guys and they decided to stop. So I decided to, you know, to top off. But, you know, the overall average is I typically put in 4.35 gallons, 4.8 a lot, and notice no problems with the bike. But taking it down to like the last third, you know, 0.3 gallons, that certainly affected the performance of the bike when you're, you know, really pushing it about 80 miles an hour or so. But again, I took it down to 70 and it was perfectly fine. So let's look at some of these numbers here. The lowest gas mileage that I got was about 27, and the highest I got was a little over 41. That's a hell of a range to have, but the differences in the wrist, really 100%. Now, one of the things I'm going to tell you, this bike is definitively, like many things, it's affected by the wind for sure. Now, I just got the bike here brand new, you know, taking it easy, getting a little more comfortable with it as I'm coming through, get to about the 10th, and all of a sudden I start finding, hey, look at this. I have some higher numbers, you know, over here I got 40 miles to the gallon. That was pretty good. You know, I got 39. Over here, got 41. That was more recently, but these are all longer trips. Then you see this big dip down here. And what this dip is I didn't have a lot of time to put a ton of miles on the bike, but I was just going back and forth to work a lot. So this was all city traffic. And I mean South Florida city traffic, sitting at lights after light after light, behind people going slow. And I was being a little aggressive on my driving. All right. So I was using my right wrist quite a bit. But the bottom line is you can see these numbers. And if you wonder why I have that dip, look at today. I filled up, and my last, you know, from today's, I put about 200 miles on today and got about 35.5 miles to the gallon. All right. Now, what does this all mean? Well, what this means is that if I take my average miles per gallon and I always fill up when I have 1 gallon left, that's 4.8, I should never ever have a problem reaching 156 miles on this bike. Now, that's not great, for an adventure touring, especially since it has the word touring in it, but it is what it is. If I take my average and I take it down to the last half a gallon, well, then I'm going to get about 173 miles out of this bike. Again, this is going off my average. It's going to be a lot higher than this if you're going to take a long trip where you're not going to be in stop and go traffic, okay? And if you want to know what it would take to run this thing empty on average, you know that if you have average mile per gallon, right before you get to 190, you're going to run out of gas, but the bike's going to start acting up long before that. Now, if I take my lowest miles per gallon that I had for any one particular tank, and again, all these are tanks. These are, you know, tankfuls based on what I was doing for that. If I take this 27 miles to the gallon and I base it off of leaving a half a gallon in a tank, which I think is reasonable, okay, you should get, in the worst case scenario, 143 miles before you have to fill up the tank. So that's not great, but it's not bad, and that's with you driving relatively aggressively and getting it down to 27 miles to the gallon. All right, I mean, there's a 14 mile per gallon spread between the lowest and the highest. All right, and if you take the highest, a 41.52, you're having a good day, maybe have a little bit of a wind at your back, you should easily be able to pump this bike up to 220 miles. Now, that brings me to today. Here's what happened today. Heading up north, I went up 95 north. I had a tailwind. It was about a 5-10 mile an hour tailwind. The winds were going a little bit north for me. And my miles per gallon, I was looking at my instantaneous miles per gallon in the 40s, easily in the 40s. Coming back, I had the wind in my face, and it was another story. It just wasn't the same. What I will tell you is a 10 mile an hour wind is going in your face is going to cut you down probably 5 to 6 miles per gallon. That's absolutely without a shadow of a doubt. That has been my experience after almost 10,000 miles, after 300 gallons. The average is about 32 miles to the gallon. Again, if this is what's important to you and you want to just head out and drive for 3-4 hours without having to stop, this is definitely not the bike for you. If you want, this is a little more sporty. I know it's not a sport touring, but if you want something a little more sporty, if you want to be able to, you know, crank up those RPMs and get this bike moving, and you're going to, you know, be on the street, well, you're not going to get great gas mileage, but you're going to have a lot of fun. So I do like the bike. This Ducati Multistrada V4S is a great bike, but now you see the breakdown, and I think this is probably one of the more, I'm not going to say elaborate, but like really true breakdowns, because I don't think that there's many people out there that have 10,000 miles on their Ducati Multistrada V4S. So when you want to look at driving in the US on the flat, in Florida, even up to Georgia, and so there we are, 32 miles to the gallon. So there you have it. Those are the numbers, about 32 miles to the gallon. That's what I'm averaging. Don't know what you're going to average if you have hills to go up and down, or you're maybe heavier on the throttle than I am. Who knows? But those are the numbers. And again, like I said, if long distance and going 3-4 hours without stopping is your thing, this isn't the bike for you. If you want to have a lot of fun, have a lot of power, and, you know, practically treat this kind of like a pseudo sport bike, then that definitely is the bike for you. I'm happy with it for the most part. We have some more things to talk about. This is Rainbow. Please like and please subscribe. Thank you.